I don't think that's a good thing for us to aim, especially if we're talking about social license and how lay people are seeing those behaviors, and even how we as equestrians should be seeing those behaviors. Many people don't bother to see lots of tail swishing and bucking up and head high or hyperflexion and all of those behaviors, open mouth and all of that. They don't bother to see that in competition, and I think that's related to this idea of learning about what those behaviors mean, because after you see it you simply cannot unsee it. And that is tricky when we start studying that, because you go to competitions and you get kind of frustrated about seeing those behaviors.
Hi, it's Karen. Welcome to Changing Rain. This week we have a special guest. He is a vet and animal behaviour and welfare expert, Dr. Gabriel Lencioni. Gabriel studied at the University of Sao Paulo veterinary school, where, as well as his vet studies, he did some really interesting research developing an AI program to recognise pain in horses. He is now working on a PhD where he's researching the use of AI to measure pain and mental state or affective state in horses during competition. This is groundbreaking research and likely to change the way equestrian sport looks in the future. So, if equestrian sport or racing is your passion or your livelihood, this episode will likely interest you. As always, we are keen to hear your thoughts, and if you have any questions, please send them to us. We are super keen to kick off our new Agony Aunt section with your questions. Our email is team@changingrain.com.au. We're always interested to hear from you, so please send us an email with your thoughts or questions. Let's get into it and go and talk to Gabriel. I'm so curious, Gabriel, how did you come to be so interested in animal behaviour and animal welfare?
That's kind of difficult question, because as far as I remember, I've always been interested in animals, and I always, as basically every kid, I think, that really likes to be around animals and all of that. But when things really changed to me in terms of really getting interested in animal behavior was mostly because I had my own dog with several issues, behavioral issues, and I tried to consult with two trainers, different trainers that were pretty much traditional, and I didn't like what I was seeing. So the dog was fearful of the trainer, and I started to think, well, I don't know what is the path I should go, but I don't think it's that one. And when I got into university, I found out that existed a science to study behavior, and that was the path I found to get out of this, and out of all the things that we see, for example, on social media with lots of opposing opinions and all of that. So when I got to study the science of behavior and training and all of that, everything got clearer to me, and I got passionate about the topic. And then coming to horses, it was basically just one step ahead, because I started to think, why do we train dogs in such a manner? And everyone says it's impossible to do it with horses, and I started finding out that it wasn't possible as well. So
I'm a vet too, Gabriel, and I was really interested that you managed to combine that interest in behaviour during your undergraduate in vet school, because most people are basically focusing on getting out, getting that degree, getting a few years of clinical practice under their belt potentially before they go on to do whatever their particular interest is. So were you unusual among your classmates?
yeah, I think so, because most of the people, as you said, they're really interested in the clinics or surgery, and they don't bother much about behavior. And also many vet schools, we don't have yet like really good degrees on animal welfare. I'm very lucky that I had my supervisor, Professor Adraldo, in my university, because we had one discipline on animal behavior and welfare. But basically, I think that to me, right from the first year, I was kind of shocked to see what I was like working in the hospital and all of that, to see how people were treating the animals. And I kept asking myself, like, isn't this dangerous, or isn't there any other better way to do it? And the answer always was like, no, this is the way we have to do it, otherwise the horse or the dog won't know how to respect you, and you will be in danger because they need to respect you, and all of those things. And I was really shocked, because in many situations I thought like, well, I don't think the animal is even getting better with all the stress that we are putting onto him. So it's really, really tricky. And I think throughout the whole years of the university, I was trying to answer myself that question. And I think it can be really challenging for students to be in that position, because many times you have to go against what professors or veterinarians in the place that you are working, for example, are telling you to do, or what they are telling you what must be done. And you're like, maybe we could try in a different way, and they're not happy, for example, trying different methods. So it can be really tricky.
And would you describe yourself as a behaviourist or a vet or both, or a veterinary behaviourist? How do you introduce yourself to people?
Yeah, I guess I would say a vet behaviorist. So yeah, usually with the behavior cases that I see, I'm always working together with the clinicians as well, because they already know the horse, they already are treating them for some issues and all of that. But it's really interesting how in vet school we also don't learn much about how to look. Even in human medicine, I think we still have this problem of not looking at the individual as a whole, and they sometimes try to look very specifically to a part of the horse where they have found a problem. And I think it's way much more than that. So many of the cases we end up just the initial part will be trying to make the basic needs better and getting the routine better, reducing stress, and all of those things that should be a norm, but that it's definitely not being done in the best possible way for horses in many, many places that I see. So even like giving enough forage, even though we learned that in vet school, or we should learn that, most horses that I see don't eat not even close to the amount of forage they should, and of course eating lots of grain. So that's already an imbalance in a really simple thing.
You know, there's when you are presented with a behavioural case, there's almost seems to be two different approaches. One is he's in pain, he should be referred to a vet, and then no, he needs a behaviourist, he needs retraining. So how do you balance both of those?
Yeah, that is really difficult, because, well, I think that people definitely need to study more about pain. And I laugh a lot when I see people saying, for example, if you have already considered pain and if you ruled out pain, and I'm always asking myself, like, are we even possible? Is it even possible to rule out pain? Because one of the aspects of pain is that it can change. So we can be in pain one day and not in the next week, for example. And that's the same for the horses. So I think that we definitely need to be very careful to rule out pain. And sometimes I've spoken to vets that, of course, they're trying to do their best with everything they know and all of that. But for them, I think that they kind of see pain as a really negative thing, because they want to tell the owners, their clients, that their horses are healthy and pain-free and able to compete and all of that. But it is not the vet's fault if the horse is in any kind of pain, you know. So in my opinion, it is essential for us to identify any initial signs of pain and treat it. And there's also one pretty traditional thing in veterinary medicine, that we used to believe that we cannot let horses be 100% pain-free. Otherwise, they will kind of hurt themselves even more because they are not in pain. So they'll keep like running and bucking up and all of that. But we know right now in the study of pain that that's not actually a good thing to be feeling pain. Even mild levels of pain could lead to issues in the long run. So basically, we would need to, let's say, control a horse if he cannot run around, for example. We could put in a smaller paddock and use lots of enrichment and do training with them, or take on walks in hand, letting them sniff and enjoy the environment, for example. But this is not something that vets are being taught, or even the owners. So we end up seeing some situations which are like bizarre in my opinion. I've seen a horse that basically it was stabled 24/7, and the owner really wanted to turn this horse out. However, it wasn't really a paddock, it was just sand, a solarium for them to let the horse free. And the horse started to eat sand. And then the vet said, well, you cannot let this horse out, otherwise he will eat sand. But one thing that I asked the owner was, did you put any forage, any hay for the horse there in the sand? No, I didn't. So the answer for the vet was easier to say, just keep this horse stabled, rather than trying to offer forage or something for the horse to do in that place, for example. And I think that's something that behavior is so far away from veterinarians that they don't even think about this possibility of trying to offer something alternative for the horse to do.
Mm. And do you think that's just a legacy, Gabriel, of that's just sort of how things have always been done, and the vet is really focused on the health aspect of the horse? So the vet obviously doesn't want the horse eating sand, because then the horse is going to get colic. And so you can see from the vet's point of view that you can't have the horse eating sand. So do you think that's something that we have to address with the training of the vets, or is it how do we help people move that forward and change that sort of thinking? Have you sort of spent much time thinking about that?
Well, I think there are two things there. So one of them is exactly what you said about tradition and how things have always been done. But I think that the second aspect as well, it is kind of, well, always when we're talking about animal welfare, we're also talking about the human welfare. And I think that worldwide, it's not something here from Brazil, but I think that vets have a really, really busy agenda, and many times don't earn enough money for that. So in the end, they are being treated, and they end up having to work in a really busy agenda and not earning enough money for that, and they end up getting in that, not enough time to think. I have to do. And I think that won't help horses as well, even to do a good clinic, and especially in terms of welfare, because then they have to they don't have enough time even to think how they are going to do a procedure. They just have to do it as quickly as they can. Doesn't matter the way. If the horse gets traumatized in the process, that's how it's done, So I think that's possibly one thing that we would have to be able to improve. It's the vet's life, basically.
I've often said on this podcast, and I'm qualified a long time, Gabriel, we had one lecture on animal welfare in final year vet school. That's all we had. And I'm currently doing a little bit of lecturing in our vet school in Dublin, and I'm so pleased to see there's a full module which is animal behaviour and welfare. So things have definitely improved dramatically. I still am concerned, I suppose, about vets of my generation and maybe the generation behind me who didn't have that exposure, and yet they are the practice owners, the influencers, they are influential in the veterinary world. So there is a bit of work to be done, I think, in spreading this word. And your own PhD research is on pain recognition, but it's a kind of a novel approach to pain recognition.
Yeah, basically my PhD study, I'm not looking only at pain, but I did do one study while I was still an undergraduate, where we tried to apply artificial intelligence to assess pain in horses. So basically, this study that I've done, it was to kind of train the algorithm to recognize the Grimace scales, which are scales that we already have validated to guide ourselves through the facial expressions of horses to assess pain. And basically, what we wanted to test was to see if we could have, for example, a camera assessing the level of pain in a horse's face. And it reached really, really interesting results showing that the system could learn what I was assessing also as pain or moderate pain or no pain. So that was really interesting to me also, that something that, especially at the time of this research, I don't think that we learn a lot in vet school, all the possibilities that technology or right now AI, which is trending a lot, could be helping us. So we do lots of tasks that are time consuming and things like that, that definitely technology is there to help us. And I think that in many other species, people use it more, like with farm animals, for example, we already have more sensors and technologies being put into practice, but I don't see that a lot with horses. So that's quite interesting. And well, answering regarding my PhD, then I'm basically getting this same idea of having technology together with the behavior and veterinarian field to assess not only pain, but I would say affective states. So bringing into also more emotions regarded to what horses are feeling.
So, just for people who might not be familiar with the Grimace scale, could you talk a little bit about how we can see pain and maybe emotion on horses' faces? What are some of the things that people can look out for?
So regarding the facial expressions, we have more than one scale that we could use, and some of them have a little bit different parameters, but generally speaking, well, the one that I used for the project was the horse Grimace scale from Dalla Costa. And basically they use parameters such as the position of the ears, the eyes, the mouth, the nostrils, the muscles from the horses, the chewing muscles, and all of those parameters end up summing up to get to a final overall level of pain for the horse. Some of the other scales vary a little bit, but they generally work in the same way. So it can be quite useful for, let's say, for example, in the hospital environment, or even for the owner to recognize those signals. But I would say that the whole idea of using, for example, an automated method to do that are two main aspects. First, that especially when the horse is in an environment that is not used to seeing another person, especially an unknown person, let's say the vet coming up, the horse will probably change the expression of pain, because it's something that it's not good for them in the wild, let's say, to be expressing pain near to a trap.
Yeah. So just I've understood that correctly. So what you're saying is if the horse, say, is in a veterinary hospital, for example, so a strange environment, and the vet comes along, the horse kind of masks their pain. Is that right? Have I heard?
Exactly.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that can happen also at the yard, for example. Maybe not as much with the owner if the owner has a good relationship with that horse, but even with the owner, sometimes the horse will mask its behavior to near humans. So that's why I quite like observing them through cameras. And the other aspect is that, well, as we were already speaking about that, vets have a really busy agenda. So they don't have 24 hours to keep looking at the recordings and see if the horse was in pain or not. So having that automated would be really helpful, not to get the vet away of the issue, but to give this tool for the vet to maybe send a warning and tell him, well, maybe we need to do some more analgesia or change our treatment, it's not working as well as we expected, or giving more information regarding that animal.
And I presume this could be extended to whole body assessment, body language, and I'm not sure. I think you said there's not much work being done yet on that in horses, but presumably watch this space, because I could think of plenty of applications for that too.
Yeah, for sure. Currently, I am familiar with some applications that are using, for example, to assess lameness in horses using AI. So they look at the whole body movement for that. And in my PhD, I am right now not looking only to facial expressions, but whole body behaviors. And this time, I'm interested not only in the, let's say, in the stabled horse, but in the horses while they are competing, so while they're being exercised. And it is a little bit different than when we're talking about pain scales, because then kind of the pain scales were coined basically using standardized models of pain and all of those things. So in competition settings, it can be a little bit more tricky to do that. So understanding what could be happening with the horse, if it's just, let's say, a learned behavior, or if it's an actual pain or discomfort, many things could be happening. But I believe that all of that are things that we have to improve in order to enhance welfare levels in competition or in ridden work with horses.
But I presume there's also potentially positives. I mean, you could potentially recognize positive affective states, which is basically the holy grail. That's what we want to see.
Yeah.
We want to see our horses are happy and enjoying what they're doing.
Yeah, that's my aim, objective with the study. And basically, I'm looking forward to find more information about that. But basically, right now I'm in the second year of my PhD, and it's 4 years in total here. And the starting point that we've done was asking specialists regarding some video clips of competitions and what were their feelings about it and their opinions about those videos. And I really do want to find out if we do have positives or negatives, but interestingly, up to this point, it seemed that people reached higher consensus on assessing the negatives than the positive aspects. And that's, I believe, completely understandable, because like we have been taught with the animal welfare science and behavior, we have always been taught on how to recognize and avoid the negatives. So that's why I'm so much interested in trying to find out more about the positives, because it's something that we have started to talk and look for that just recently in terms of science, pretty much recently. So yeah, that would be really amazing to find out more. And if I can hypothesize a little bit about that, I think that in order to find more positives or to be more certain about the positives, we will need to rethink the training methods that we are using, the equipment, and all of those aspects in order for us to kind of select positive behaviors in the horses. Because most of them, or a big part of them at least, are just inhibiting signals that they would be showing in competition. So I think that's kind of what we would like to select and look for in the equine sports, to have more horses expressing themselves better, basically.
I sometimes wonder though, is this scale from negative to positive, very unhappy to very, very happy. Maybe that's a bit artificial. I every time I drive down the road and I see horses in a field, I don't necessarily see them galloping with, full of joy, whatever that might be. And I wonder if for horses there's a kind of a neutral to slightly positive state that is their default, rather than, and I think maybe it's something similar to the way we see children expressing their emotions of happiness and joy and excitement. But as we mature, we become adults, we don't show that overtly. We might be very happy inside, but we maybe don't show it as much. I wonder if there's something about that as well in horses.
Yeah, that's amazing. And basically, I'm guiding myself through the concept of the core affective space. That's there's a really nice study by Mike Mandel on that, and it's basically they are talking about two dimensions. So the level, let's say the valence of negative from positive, as you said, but there's also the arousal levels. So high arousal behaviors or low arousal behaviors. And that makes it possible for us to put them in all of those different places. Let's say we could have something positive with low arousal, just a relaxed behavior, or something more high energy that could also be positive or negative, and sometimes needs a better understanding to judge what that actually is. So I think this tool and this concept is really, really helpful for us to get more answers regarding to that. But it is really difficult when we're talking about behavior because context changes everything always. So yeah, it's kind of tricky for us to assess that. But I think that's the really important part to do.
And so what excites you most about this research? Like obviously when you embark on a PhD, you know that it's going to be lots of hard work. And what excited you about pursuing this project, Gabriel?
Well, I guess that I had a really great experience doing research still as an undergraduate, and I thank a lot my supervisor because of that, because for many supervisors, they kind of give undergrad students only a really tiny piece of thing to do, or just kind of laborious work like with things from other projects and all of that. And I came up to my supervisor and started chatting with him about this idea, and we had an opportunity to get a stipend for a project that had to be related to something that was innovative. And so I started chatting to him about that, and he came up with this idea of, well, maybe we could automate the Grimme scale. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So I got really passionate about research and this whole idea of having something to guide myself throughout my journey with horses and all of that. And so basically, why I kept going on with the PhD, I really liked the science and the academic environment itself, but also because my supervisor was very interested in us doing this type of research that we are doing, that it's something that it's really applicable and not in a really long time, because that's something that I really wanted to do. I didn't want to do only a research that maybe could be used in 50 years time frame or something. I think that the equine industry is already too far behind what it should be in terms of applying science and knowledge to the current practices. And I think that's what really got me passionate about it, because I wanted to find things and learn new things that could be applied like yesterday to help enhance equine welfare levels. So that's where I hope I get by the end of my PhD.
We don't want to distract you from that brilliant work, but there's so much going on in the whole wide world of equine welfare and equine behaviour. Is there any other area that kind of has you interested, that you think, oh, I might think about that when I have a bit of downtime? You know, is there something out there that you think could be another direction to go in?
Well, do you mean regarding horses or in general?
Well, probably regarding horses, but general is fine too.
Yeah, well, I think that I'm very passionate also, as we were talking about that, the whole part of training and positive reinforcement training. I think that's something that also needs more research being done, and also has a lot to do with this topic that we were talking about, finding new ways or ways that the horses enjoy more to be trained, for example. So I'm very passionate about that, and I'm keen on doing like cooperative care aspects with the horses, especially because of this whole background with vet school and all of that. So those are areas that I enjoy a lot to apply, even with my own horse. And what else? I also like a lot to study dog behavior, so that's also really interesting. And I'm always kind of interested reading, for example, articles of other species and things like that, because I think that we benefit a lot in terms of behavior, even though we have the differences between species and all of that. It is so helpful to learn more about how they work, and sometimes we learn a different perspective coming up from the knowledge from other species and all. So it's quite interesting.
You mentioned, Gabriel, training horses with positive reinforcement. So there's a lot of people in the horse industry that suggest that they're not on board necessarily with training horses with positive reinforcement. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is the way forward for training horses for better sort of outcomes?
Well, I would say that learning theory itself is not applied in a really good way throughout the equine industry. So many people, even trainers, at least here in Brazil, I think that most countries basically, you don't need any type of certification in order to be a trainer or a professional or a professor or something. So it is kind of tricky, because then the knowledge kind of loses itself, and we don't have any way to kind of check what people are learning or applying, and we end up keeping many times to the traditions that, of course, there's no problem with a tradition itself, but if we already have scientific knowledge, for example, telling us that there might be a better way to do it, then we should go after that. And I think that we already have lots of things in terms of positive reinforcement, for example, or other techniques that have been studied with other species and mostly with dogs. I end up seeing a lot of the dog training world because it's so much ahead than the horses, and we are able to apply all of that with the horses. So I laugh a lot about this, because I see people saying, for example, well, this only works with dogs, it doesn't work with horses. And then you go to a zoo and see people doing it with elephants and zebras and anything else you can imagine. So yeah, there's no way to think like the horses would be the only species unable to learn that way. So I think that's just like one point of it. And it is something like when we start talking about positive reinforcement, that it is trying to basically work with things that are reinforcing, so basically things that are motivating for that individual, instead of, for example, avoiding pressure from what we are putting on. And I would say even the biggest issue that people very easily end up escalating pressure, and things can be pretty aversive for horses that are being dealt in that way. So I would say that even for people that are not open initially to positive reinforcement, the most important thing is learning about learning theory and how they should be applying, for example, negative reinforcement in a more ethical way. And then they might start getting open to using one or two behaviors, even in a playful manner, being trained by using positive reinforcement, and then it might open different possibilities for them. And yeah, I think that can be a difficult journey, because many times we have to kind of change everything that we knew, especially if you are a professional, for example. So I took some courses with Trudy Dempsey, and in my opinion, she's one of the best, if not the best trainer with horses. And it was so interesting for me when I took the first course with her, because I already did positive reinforcement training, but she's a huge fan, for example, of doing things in an errorless manner. So basically trying to avoid errors, from avoiding mistakes from the horses. And that was such a huge mindset change to me, because basically in traditional training, people want the animal to make the mistake so they can correct, so they can punish it. And even with positive reinforcement, people already try to avoid mistakes a little bit more, but some trainers still get used, for example, to keep the horse there trying to find out on its own, and being kind of frustrated with the whole situation. And it was so interesting to me to see how we can do it without bothering much with the mistakes. And then it's kind of our task to make things easier for the horse, change the environment, change what we are asking, and then they simply get the idea in a moment, and that makes the whole thing way less frustrating for them and for us as well. Because I think that's a really difficult part of training, is having to keep ourselves relaxed when things don't go as planned, as expected. So it's a really good thing. Even doing vet things or regular training, sometimes it's just better to throw them some food and go around for a while, get yourself back to your head, and then restart. And, you know, I think this is the mindset that people should be looking for in training, and not the mindset that I have seen people saying, for example, no, you have to kind of be angry when you are riding, otherwise the horse will dominate you and things like that. Well, that's not where we should be going, you know.
Yeah. Do you have a simple example that you could share where you are trying to avoid the mistakes, and is there a simple thing that you can think of which you might have been training where you've set it up to sort of avoid the mistakes, and so that the horse can just kind of understand it?
Yeah, even like, for example, if you're trying to teach a backup, and the horse is doing that clumsy backup, going to the sides, for example, I can just help the horse by doing it next to a wall or putting poles in the ground, for example, and then it will be easier for the horse to go back to do the backup straight, just by having a cue from the environment. And that's something that people sometimes get so worried about. No, the horse has to learn on its own, even in this difficult place. And no, they don't have to. And then if you take out one pole and then the other later, they will learn that, and you just have to generalize it in different environments. So I kind of see that a lot when people, even when they try to use food, for example, they're just like, oh, I tried to use food already, but they just keep, like, for example, putting the horse inside the stocks, and they offer a carrot, and then the horse steps forward and they put the carrot further away, and then the horse steps forward and then the horse stops stepping inside the stocks because they never earn anything. So, and then I have to kind of try to explain people, just reward the horse for just lifting their weight to the front. They don't even have to walk. And people are like, no, but then it's too easy for them. Yeah, and that's where we want to get. It's to be easy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's difficult because sometimes it is a change in mindset. And for example, even doing cooperative care, I constantly reward, for example, if the horse says a no to me, if they try to move away, for example, from the procedure that I'm doing, I reward them. And then I understand that people could be worried, for example, but then you are rewarding for something that you don't want. So aren't you getting like a bad thing there? And that's where it gets to changing the environment. Because if, of course, if I keep rewarding things that I don't want, then it will keep happening. So let's say, even with my own horse, he had his eye sore recently, and I had to apply eye drops and all of that. Lots of times, many times through the day with him. And basically, if I am touching his eye and he moves his head away, I would give him food. So in the next time, I wouldn't move with the same intensity that I did previously. So I just tried maybe just by him approaching his eye to my hand, and I would reward him. So make things easier. And then I'm able to reward him for easier repetitions, and then increase very, step by step, little by little, trying to get him comfortable with that, so that he doesn't have to avoid that. So I don't have to reward for the wrong, but there's also the possibility of him to going for that. So it is a bit, I think, that difficult for us to understand this whole concept when we're starting to do it, because it's so different than what we were taught throughout our whole lives, even with children or with dogs or everything, that we kind of need to show the wrong or punish the wrong. And yeah, just to give another example for people that maybe are more used to dog training, or they're trained their dogs inside their houses but not with horses. Many times, for example, when people want to teach dogs how to do their needs inside the house, for example, we simply put the mats in the whole space where the dog is, because this way they will make it right, and then you can just reward him for that. Which is really different than put one mat in the whole house and the dog has to make it right, and then you punish him if it gets it wrong. So then you can fade out all the helps that you're using, but the process will be better and less frustrating if you go through this path with less mistakes, basically.
Your mention of Trudy was very apt, because in preparation, doing my homework for this interview, I watched a great webinar that you did with Justine Harrison.
Awesome! Yeah.
Understand Horses, and yourself and Trudy went through. I suppose it was about resilience in young horse, developing resilience in young horses, which I found fascinating, because my background is thoroughbred breeding, and of course anything we can do to improve the resilience of our young horses is something we absolutely want. Is there a nugget you might give to a breeder like myself? What one thing would you tell us about developing that resilience?
Well, it's a topic that I'm also fascinated about, and there are some research being done also in this area in our research group here in University of São Paulo. And there's a student whose name is Anna Montecchesi, and her PhD is also in this topic of understanding better the early life of foals and how all of those things affect horses. And my supervisor also has some research being done in that area with pigs, but they are studying, for example, the whole role of epigenetics and how basically what happens to the male and the female, even before the foals are born, for example, or the piglets in the case of their study, will affect even health and behavior of the offspring. So that's really, really an interesting area. And I think that for horses, we have lots to do. So basically, if I had to give this hint for a breeder, I would say that traditionally, many times we only start thinking about the horses when they are old enough to be ridden. And there are lots of things that we could be doing and helping them right from the start, even before they are born. So I think that's where I would go. And also this whole idea about having a good life, we cannot even say yet, but like it makes a huge difference. If you have like kind of a good life and good early life, it will kind of give horses the strength and the resilience to cope with all the stress and difficulties that could come up in their lives later on. So it is still really common for us to see abrupt weaning happening, and for some motivated by some reasons that are not even the best reasons. It's just, oh, they need to be separated, and people want to do it abruptly, and all of those other stressors. For example, horses they get used to the stables just abruptly as well. They just get outside of the pastures and closed inside a stable out of nowhere on their own, and they get a lot stressed because of that. So I think that all of those aspects, even those ideas of interacting with the foals kind of forcefully and wanting to hug the foals and get the foals, and we know already that kind of giving them these good experiences in the beginning will make a massive change. So I believe that that's where I would go. And even for people that are worried, even, oh, I don't bother with behavior, I bother about stereotypies, they are also related to all those stressors that happen in early life. So it's so important to make things better for them at that point.
And I think it actually works both ways. I think someone who's taking on a young horse, I think it really is worthwhile knowing how that horse was reared from its early stages, so because you will know very quickly whether some farms do a really good job of this low stress handling, and you're making sure that they have that resilience built in, and other farms possibly not so much. And also, I think from the breeder's point of view, if your stock goes on to be resilient and, you know, easy to be around, and, you know, I think that is a kind of a marker of that you're doing something right. So it's an area I'm kind of passionate about it too, and I think it's definitely under researched and also not spoken about enough. People just think these horses arrive fully formed into their yard.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because then even economically it could be interesting for breeders, because then maybe the foal coming from a place that is worried about all of that, it could be worth more than horses from other traditional breeders, for example.
So, Gabriel, if I've just understood you correctly, because I can imagine some people thinking maybe, well, these horses are going to go off into really stressful environments. They're going to have careers in racing or show jumping or whatever they might be. You know, they need to learn to handle stress from an early age. But really, what I think I'm hearing you saying is that if we make their lives fairly stress-free when they're youngsters, they're more likely to cope with that stress later in life. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, people have a really funny idea regarding how we learn to cope with stress. And I think there's this whole traditional idea, even with humans, that, well, I have been through a lot, and because of that I learned how to cope well with stress and all of that. And I really don't think that's how things happen, because, for example, if you have to take a math test and you are always failing it, then what we will reach in the end is basically you hating math and not wanting to get near that. But if you are always there getting a 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, then maybe you get one more wrong, and then you're able, but then you trust yourself, you're confident about that, and then you're being able to reach, more challenging situations. And that's basically where we want to get with the horses, that they get curious about things, and maybe they get a little bit spooked about something that they went out to explore, but then they're able to get away and get back, or to further the distance from their mother, for example, which they usually do naturally, but then they can come back to their mother, and then there's such a big difference in doing that. So even learning from other foals, being around, socializing with other foals, other horses, from a diverse experience for them will make a massive difference on how to cope with that. And I think that for many of those things, like, people start training a horse and they already want to take them to the arena and ask lots of things for them to do, and sometimes just getting inside the arena, walking in hand and eating some food and going back it's already a lot and would make a massive difference. So yeah, I think it's basically what we always speak of, let's say, about working them from the ground before we are mounting, for example, should be the same thing for other behaviors or other situations of our lives that people don't usually see as training, but definitely are preparing their horses in a better way.
Absolutely. Gabriel, we've just recently did a poll of our audience just to see what they think about the podcast and ideas for the future. And one of the questions we asked them was whether they were optimistic or pessimistic about the future of horse sport. What's your view?
Well, that's a really difficult question. And, well, I try to be optimistic, I would say, but I think that we are living right now a changing point for that. So I think that we have a decision to be made. We, as all stakeholders involved, all interested parties, have a really important decision to be made on the next years, which will be, do we want to change or not? So basically, of course, we always have people that are really traditional and they are happy about how things are happening and they are sure that we don't have to change anything. Everything is perfect in equestrian sports. And I believe that's not where any of us, our opinion lies basically. And there's also the people that want to abolish equine sports and think that things cannot be done in a better way. And I would say that I put myself in the middle there. So with all of those topics that I have been studying and learning to apply and all of that, I think that it's a massive change already from what I was taught when I was young, for example, on how we should treat horses. And I think that's would be a massive shift already on how things could be happening on our relationship as humans with horses. So I think that it is possible for us to make things better, but there is the need for people to really act and make this as an active change, not only waiting for things to magically get better because they won't if that's what is happening, you know. So yeah, I think that's where I would try to put myself.
Yeah. We talked to Bronwyn Williams, who wrote a book about motivational interviewing for animal welfare. And one of the things she described was the theory of change, and you can't initiate change until you recognise that there's a problem. You know, that something needs to happen. So I guess that's what you're kind of saying is until we decide, as in all of the stakeholders, that there is a problem, we're probably going to struggle to make that transition. But what I really find optimistic in what you're saying, Gabriel, is that you think that not only is the change possible, but we can do things in a way where horses have good lives.
Yeah, and I love those two aspects that you said. Like first, that like really many people don't know about things. So I got even asked, for example, when I published this first research on automated methods to assess pain, there was a vet that came to me and said, "Isn't that dangerous? Because then people will know that the horses are in pain and all of that." So, and I was like, well, I haven't even thought about that because to me it's good for us to know if the horse is not feeling well. So you see, maybe some people are still very much in a defensive manner trying to protect the equine sports, but they don't know that this is actually what is making things bad for the equine industry. So I think that's a great point. And regarding the lives of horses, that's the main aspect. I think that we can improve things a lot. Even in horses that are in traditional yards, we can make things better for them even there, and then maybe we will have to change things a little bit more and more and more. And I think that's where we should be aiming. So I see some people that like they have said, for example, I wouldn't go to see a case, for example, in a traditional yard because those horses are stable 24/7, and I understand that view, but I don't act that way because I prefer to go there and say, well, even though this horse is not living the life that I believe it should be living, but I want to make things better for this individual. So, and many times the owner is open, for example, to go there every day and to walk in hand and, you know, make other situations from their day, make nutrition better, the possibility for them to socialize with other horses, even if it is in hand. It's, you know, it's not the best or where I want to reach, but sometimes this can be an open door for that person to learn better about it and try to do things in a better way. And I find it so funny that sometimes when people see me interacting with my horse, for example, the first thing that they say is, "Oh, he looks just like a big dog." And I'm like, well, maybe we haven't been taught throughout their lives that horses are social a lot and that they learn a lot and they can like to interact with us. But many times people end up having a pretty traditional relationship with their horses, which is just they get there to the yard and the horse is already saddled up and it's tackled up and they just have to ride and for an hour and maybe give one carrot and go away. So there's no way that you're going to build a relationship like that. So yeah, I think that people kind of need to learn that we can build relationships with horses, but in order to do that we also have to kind of give them a voice when they don't want to do things with us, and it's fine, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are, like, I can definitely relate to that whole thing of them being like a big dog, because they're incredibly curious. So if they feel like it's okay and safe, they do want to interact, and they're incredibly nosy and want to know what you're getting up to. And you can definitely have a very interactive sort of relationship with the horses, rather than a transactional, only purely just a transactional riding type relationship, if that's what you want.
Yeah, exactly. I think that many times people are kind of worried of using, for example, positive reinforcement, because they're afraid of that the horse might start to be too much in your space and all of that. And I think that in answering those people is that it's basically the same with dogs. Of course, the horse is bigger and probably more dangerous when they're doing that. But if you train them, if you teach them how you will interact, then you won't have a problem. So even if you don't know how to do that, go after a trainer that can help you do that. But for example, you can teach your dog to go on your bed or not if you don't like. It's the same with your horse trying to bite you to get food or not. If they learn how they're going to get to the food or how they have to interact with you, they will learn as well. So it's just a matter of training.
Yeah. And they pick it up pretty quick, don't they?
A lot. It's so impressive.
Yeah. So you might have a little bit of unwanted sort of nuzzling and mugging and things, but it doesn't last very long if you're consistent and you know how to train effectively. It doesn't last very long, and they very quickly learn that that's not how they're going to get the food, and then they stop.
Yeah, exactly. I think that many times people say those things as, I don't like to use food because those things happen. And what I always like to say is that those things could happen if you're not training it correctly. So it's basically lots of wrong things could happen when you're using negative reinforcement as well, for example. Especially if you are a bad trainer. Bad things will happen. There are adverse effects, let's say. So that's why we have to learn the technique. It's not a really easy thing and just give food to the horse and they will do a backflip. You have to kind of teach them how to do things, and then they will learn, as you said, having a clear pattern, having clear consistency with them to show how things will happen, and they will get it right away.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm really curious about that you mentioned sort of really early on, Gabriel, was as part of your PhD, you are looking not only at pain but emotion. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of what do you look for when you're describing emotion? Because some people might be perhaps skeptical that you can do that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, there is one difficulty when we are training AI, for example, that is people don't usually speak about that, but every AI that we train is kind of based in what we are giving as input for the AI to learn. And that's why in my methodology I decided to ask people, lots of people, about lots of videos to see what were their views, in order for me to use the videos and the opinions that reached higher consensus for me to train the AI in the best possible manner, basically with what we call in the AI world would be a gold standard or a ground truth, which is basically we are certain that we are training what we want to train for the AI. And regarding emotions, we have I think that people are accepting better this idea since we had like the Cambridge Declaration of Animal Consciousness, and then more recently people seem to be happier with this idea that other animals also express emotions, maybe in different way than what we do, but there are positive and negative things that they are experiencing. And basically, briefly, the idea to me from this PhD is that we could have better knowledge, for example, in competition, or even changing the rules of competitions, or having the help of AI to select what we want to see in competition. So, for example, if we see a jumping competition, basically the rule is that if the horse doesn't drop any poles, it will be the winner if it makes in better time. But in my opinion, let's say if two competitors reach the same exact time without dropping any poles, or pretty close time without dropping any poles, maybe the one that was more relaxed and harmonious and showing positive signs throughout the whole course should be the winner, and not the one that was like tail swishing and bucking up throughout the whole course but didn't drop any poles. And I don't think that's a good thing for us to aim, especially if we are talking about social license and how lay people are seeing those behaviors, and even how we as equestrians should be seeing those behaviors. Many people don't bother to see lots of tail swishing and bucking up and head high or hyperflexion and all of those behaviors, open mouth and all of that. They don't bother to see that in competition. And I think that's related to this idea of learning about what those behaviors mean, because after you see it, you simply cannot unsee it. And that is tricky when we start studying that, because you go to competitions and you get kind of frustrated about seeing those behaviors. So I guess that's what would be my aim, to have technology helping in the sport as we have in many other sports right now, and then maybe selecting even in the competition and throughout the training, because then it will be a problem, for example, for the person if that horse is tail swishing a lot, or head shaking, or doing any of those other behaviors. So they will have to work better under training to avoid that. So this is a possibility where I think things could go, and kind of maybe we won't be able to exactly tell which emotion or how they're feeling. But I think that we do have already enough evidence to talk about what are the negative behaviors that we are seeing reading, even if it's not pain related, could be a discomfort, or could be a trained issue, or just a position that's not beneficial long term for the horse. But I'm so interested also, as we were speaking about the positives, so trying to learn more about what should we be selecting, or maybe even rewarding extra points for horses that are in that manner. So horses that are showing that, or riders that are being able to do the tasks from the competition in that manner, should be rewarded extra points for that. And of course I spoke here briefly about jumping, but that happens, I think, in a little bit different way for each kind of sport or discipline that we are talking, since I think that each discipline has its its different aspects, some positions that a horse will do more or less in one competition or the other. But I think that in all of them there are things that we maybe could teach people, that it is good to get rid of those things, or some things that we should be trying to select and put more into competition.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds really interesting. So we've got AI coming to a show near you.
No, it's definitely it's very intriguing, and a few of our guests in previous episodes have kind of danced around this, but they probably weren't sure if the technology existed. So I think I can see a coming together of a new way of looking at horse sport and competition, not necessarily the highest or the fastest, or whatever the measure might be. It could be something more holistic, and that has to be good for the horse.
Is there anything we haven't asked you, Gabriel, that you wish we had asked you?
Well, yeah, I don't think so. I think that we went through uh, lots of topics, and which I quite like to talk about them, so we could be here for some hours. And yeah, I think that many times when there are humans assessing things in competition, that it is easier to have a discussion. Let's say, oh, you just want to benefit this competitor or the other, or you're protecting him or her or whatever. So that's a really important aspect. I think that AI could help us to be more objective. So it's not a human making decisions. It's kind of an objective training coming to that decision. So of course there's discussions, even like when we talk about in soccer, for example, with the automated referee, and there's lots of discussion on that. But as the technology improves, also these discussions are like reducing. So I think that will be space for that in the future.
Yeah, and it's cricket season here in Australia, and there's the review of the cricket, and that's become quite accepted now. So it's AI is coming into more and more things, isn't it, in terms of sport?
I'm thinking about your veterinary applications and thinking there are certainly situations where it's very useful to be able to say, but the AI says something, because the owner can put a lot of pressure on the vet, to answer in a certain way, or keep the horse going, or whatever it might be. But if you have something objective, third party, that says, well, actually we need to just back off here because there's something going on and we need to take this a bit further, that could be really really helpful.
Yeah, that's it, because there's that human element for the vet, isn't there, with there's so much pressure, and I can see how that would take a lot of mental strain away from the vet potentially.
That was one question. I'm just interested. You're actually our first guest from Latin America, and I'm just interested in potential cultural differences in the approach to animal welfare, to behavioural science, to all of this. I mean, a lot of the work obviously is done in the Anglo-Saxon world, and great work done in France and Switzerland. And I'm just wondering, what's it like for you in Brazil? There obviously is a nucleus of really good work going on, but I'd love to hear how that works, how it's.
Yeah, well, basically, Brazil is a country with lots of horses. Is one of the countries with more horses, but they are used in lots of different ways. So since we are in a really big country here, we have, for example, in each state, disciplines that are more common or more famous in each state. So even from Western or more classical and all of that. And we also have places where horses are still being used in working farms, for example, and all of that. It has changed a lot recently with more machinery and more technology being applied also to those farms. But we still have horses being used as working horses also. So I guess it makes a really different situation from where you are in the country. But one thing I would say that was a bit challenging to me is that we have a big culture around horses, but it is still a lot based in tradition and all of those things that we were saying. Like, people do things because they learned that way from their father or their grandfather, or things that are just tradition going on and on. So, and also there is one that for a good part of the country there is a barrier regarding language as well. So I had the opportunity, for example, to go after many of those things that we were talking here today, because I was able to take online courses and even to spend time abroad, and I took English classes and I could read papers in English and all of that. So I know it's easier nowadays for people to kind of automatically translate things and all, but I think that's still a barrier. So we don't have a lot of content, and especially science-based content in terms of horse training or even things related to equine competitions here. So I think that that's really important, and why I think it's great even for me here to be able to send people in the direction of podcasts or other things that are available outside from Brazil, for them to also get to know what is happening outside, because I think that some people only see the industry here and do not even hear about all of those problems or issues that we are able to discuss that are happening worldwide, and that we start some things that I thought were only a problem here, for example, and then I started talking with people abroad and it was the same there, or some things that are a little bit different. So some of those cultures, I think it's definitely interesting for us to find out and learn more about it. So yeah.
In fact, one of our poll comments from one of the people, our listeners that we polled, said that we don't have enough variety of cultures represented on the podcast. So you're helping to redress that balance for us.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think like it can also be really difficult, not only in Brazil, but people from Latin America or other places, that we many times have difficulty to do things or learn how to do things in a different way, because we don't have peers near us doing things also.
Yeah.
So I was lucky to be able to talk to people from other countries and being able to kind of, nowadays online is easier for us to do that, but it can be challenging not to have anyone near you, and it seems that you're going in a different direction than what everyone else is doing or every other professional is doing. So I understand how people can feel pressured about that and opt in a different way to go,
Yeah, definitely. Because it can be a bit lonely if you feel like you're the only person doing something different, and everyone else, no one else can see a problem, and you're the only one that's sort of saying, hey, hang on a minute, I think maybe we need to do this a little bit differently. And it sounds like you felt that even when you started vet school.
Yeah, and it's so challenging. Like nowadays, I don't bother much about it anymore. So I go even to a really busy yard with my treat pouch and food, and I don't bother what people will say. But especially for someone starting, it can be so difficult trying to make people fine about that. And there's so much peer pressure, so they will hear from everyone in the yard that what they're doing is wrong and that they are spoiling their horse and things like that. So it can be so difficult to cope with those things. I was really lucky to have also colleagues and other vets and trainers and owners here in Brazil who were open enough to what I was saying. So they said, well, I don't know about it, but I think that you are in the right way, so feel free to do it with my horses, or feel free to try it. And it was really important to me to have those people that were at least open-minded to try things in a different manner. But of course, if you have someone near you, then that already knows about this, and it makes everything so much easier.
Definitely, yeah. Well, I think this is the first Changing Rein that's been recorded entirely in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Very good point.
Yeah, so covered the global south today.
That's good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. I've really loved our chat. I really want to pick your brains for a couple of hours about this research that you're doing, because it sounds amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great to chat to you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thanks for joining us, Gabriel. We really appreciate it.